Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala khatamil anbiya wa sayyidil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi al-ghurril mayameen wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi as-sami'il alim minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wa ma arsalnaka illa rahmatan lil alamin. Wa qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, ballighu anni walau ayah. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, thank you very much for attending this important lecture. I will be talking about Aurangzeb Alamgir, and he was a Mughal emperor who governed from the year 1658 to 1707, almost 49 years. And he is a very controversial figure in this current day and age, in particular in India and in general within the Western academia. And there's a reason for that. The reason is, in India, he's controversial because the Hindu right-wing parties, specifically the one in power right now, BJP, has made it a business for itself to tarnish Aurangzeb Alamgir because he is seen as a very Muslim king. And because of his strong attachment to Islam, which we find in historical sources, he has been demonized beyond historical narratives. And some modern historians have challenged that narrative. In fact, recently, a historian from the US called Audrey Trusk, and she is a lady, she has written this very important book titled Aurangzeb, The Life and Legacy of India's Most Controversial King. This was published in 2017. It is the most recent work on the life of Aurangzeb Alamgir, and it is very brief. You will not find details in this book. The book is about 108 pages long if we minus the notes and the bibliography of the book. It is a very good narrative. It gives you a summary of the life of Aurangzeb Alamgir, and some of the controversies have been discussed in this book. So what are the controversies about Aurangzeb Alamgir? Why is he so important in today's India and internationally? Why is he so important? He's important because he is seen as a bigot, a religious bigot who was demolishing temples, Hindu temples, who was persecuting Hindus. He had an anti-Hindu policy. I mean, these are the claims, these are the charges against him. I'm repeating the charges. And we will see whether these charges are actually historically tenable or they can be sustained in the light of historical narrative available to us today. So Aurangzeb Alamgir is controversial for these reasons. He's accused of persecuting Sikhs. In fact, there's no doubt one of the Sikh gurus, the eighth Sikh guru was it was the ninth Guru. The Guru Tegh Bahadur was killed in 1675 by the orders of Aurangzeb Alamgir. So even Sikhs don't like him. So why is this king so important? Despite the fact that India was the most powerful country in the world during his reign, 24% of the world's GDP, in other words, world's economy or money, was in India at the time when Aurangzeb was governing. This was the peak of the Indian civilization, when the Indians had become the richest and the most powerful people in the world. Although India had little influence outside, but within the Indian subcontinent, the Mughals were very, very powerful. So we will look into these charges, whether Aurangzeb was actually a religious bigot or whether he was actually out to destroy all the temples in India, whether he was a persecutor of the Sikhs, whether he was someone who deliberately marginalized Hindus from power or from the state apparatus. We will look into all these charges very quickly. First, about the man himself. Who was he? He was a Mughal emperor, born in 1618 to Shah Jahan and his favorite wife Mumtaz Mahal. Have you all heard about Taj Mahal? Right? One of the most famous visited site in India. India, when it is advertised globally, you have to see one image that comes to screens very often, and that image is the image of the Taj Mahal, the famous Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal is a tomb made by the Emperor Shah Jahan for his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who was the mother of Aurangzeb. So together they had nearly 14 children. Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal, that shows the relationship they had. They had a very strong relationship, and they were in love deeply. And Shah Jahan was devastated when his wife died, and he was so devastated that he was hardly seen in public for many months after the death of his beloved wife. And then he paid a lavish tribute to his wife by building this monument called the Taj Mahal, which is visited by many people to this day. So Aurangzeb was the son of that very woman. He was the third son born to Shah Jahan. And there were other sons born, of course. In total, there were four. Dara Shukuh was the eldest. Then there was Shah Shuja, who was the second son. Aurangzeb Alamgir was the third son. And then there was a fourth son called Murad. So these are four sons of the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan was the son of Jahangir. Jahangir was the son of Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. And Akbar was the son of Humayun, and Humayun was the son of Babur, who was the first Mughal emperor. Babur came from Central Asia. I don't want to go into the history of the Mughal invasions into India, or how the Mughals started in the first place, and who the Mughals were, and where they came from, and their background history, because that will be a lecture in itself. I'm talking about Aurangzeb today. So I will give you a very brief background history on the Mughals. Thank you. So the Mughals originated from Central Asia, and Babur was the ruler of Samarkand and Bukhara. And he was driven into Afghanistan by other Uzbek tribes, and then he thought of invading India. He invaded India in 1526, cut the long story short, and he defeated the Muslim king of India at the time called Ibrahim Lodi. Ibrahim Lodi was defeated, even though he outnumbered Babur's army by far. Babur's archers and his guns outgunned Ibrahim Lodi's army, and he came to power in 1526. He only lived for 4 years after that, and in 1530 he died, having left India. And he didn't like India much. He was from Central Asia. He liked the weather of Central Asia. He liked the people of Central Asia. When he came to India, he found it to be very hot, dusty, and he specifically writes that the people of India are not as good looking as the people of Central Asia. So he had this prejudice against the Indian people. So Babur was definitely an outsider, no doubt. But then after he died, his son came to power, Humayun, who was an opium addict, to say the least, and was not a very strong king. He governed for 10 years, and then an Afghan general called Sher Khan, also known as Sher Shah, the Lion King, literally translated, and his name was Farid Khan. He's not the Lion King of Disneyland, by the way. Okay, so, but he was the Mufasa of India for at least 5 years. He governed India with an iron fist. He was a very strong administrator. I'm talking about Sher Shah Suri. And he built many monuments, he built roads, he established the postal system, he established many sarai. Sarai were the resting places for travelers across the empire. So he was a very, very effective leader. And if he had not been killed by an accident in one of the campaigns in India, then he would have ruled for a very long time, and he would have been a very powerful leader indeed. But within 5 years, Sher Shah's reign was over, and then his sons came to power. Islam Shah Suri and Salim Shah and Adil Shah, and these people, they all fought each other for another 10 years. And having ruled for 15 years, almost 16 years, the Suris were ousted by Humayun, because Humayun, who had taken refuge in Iran when he had to leave India, when this general called Sher Shah had rebelled against the Mughals. So by the help of the Persian emperor At the time, Humayun was able to come back and take the land of India back from the Suris. So he was re-established in India. And the year was 1555. So he only governed for a few months when he fell from the stairs of his library and died. So there was an accident in the library. He slipped from the stairs and he died. And Akbar, his son, Muhammad Akbar, was 13 at the time. So he had to take the burden of the empire and he became the Mughal emperor. And because he was a child, he was very fragile. Other people governed on his behalf until he was an adult, or until he was actually able to rule India. And when he became an adult, or when he became of age, he removed all the other people who were governing on his behalf, and he took direct control. In the beginning, he was a very religious man. He was praying 5 times a day. He was actually cleaning the mosques, and he was a very humble man. He would pick up the slippers of ulama and put them in front of the ulama so that they can wear them. This is the kind of person he was initially. But he was illiterate. Unfortunately, because of the turmoil in his early life, the political turmoil he faced because of the fugitive years of his father, and because he was also he was born in exile, he couldn't be educated properly like a proper Mughal king or prince. So because of this illiteracy, he always relied on others to give him information. Cut the long story short, he kind of drifted away from Islam because he saw the character and the behavior of the ulama at the time to be very repulsive. He found some of the ulama, of course, ulama su, they were not ulama of, ulama haq, as we say. They were obviously after money and power and influence, and they were misbehaving. Akbar had made a center for debates. It was called Ibadat Khana in his palace, and he would get the ulama and people from other religions to come and have debates in this center. So when he saw these debates, all of these people were misbehaving. They were cursing each other, they were insulting each other, like a lot of people do nowadays. I don't know if you remember this program that used to come on Pakistani channels, especially in Ramadan. This guy called Amir Liaquat, he has 5 or 6 ulama sitting next to each other, and they are debating each other, and they are using very foul language at times, and they are swearing at each other. And when I was watching this program, even last Ramadan, what came to my mind was Akbar's Ibadat Khana, where Akbar would have these ulama debate each other, and they would misbehave, they would use foul language, and because of that, Akbar was put off Islam. And likewise, there are people with little knowledge of Islam, with weak hearts, with weak inclination towards Islam. They could be easily influenced in places like Pakistan when watching these programs, ulama bickering with each other in that foul manner. So Akbar had eventually abandoned Islam. I'm not giving you the details. These are very, very brief, scanty, anecdotal things I'm sharing with you from the life of these Mughal emperors. For the details, chunky volumes have been written on them. You can go and look at the details. So Akbar had initiated his own religion. In other words, he had apostatized from Islam. His religion was called Deen-e-Ilahi. He said, if this is the best Islam has to offer, I don't want it. Okay, so he said, I will initiate my own religion, because he had arrogance and he had some funny advisors who made him think that he was somehow divine. One of them was a man called Abul Fazl, who had brainwashed him to an extent that Akbar started to think that he had divine powers. So he initiated his own religion. Then he died in 1605. And then his son Jahangir came to power, who had to reassert his Islamic identity. He had to disown his father, at least in religious ideology, and he insisted that his father repented on deathbed, and there's no evidence for that. But Jahangir had to reassert his Islamic identity, but he was also a drunkard. Jahangir was mostly drunk, and he was, of course, every Mughal emperor inherited problems, rebellions, wars, and financial issues. So he had ministers taking care of all of that, and he died very young. A lot of these Mughal emperors would die very young because they would consume opium as an aphrodisiac, and they had large harems filled with women from all parts of the world, and their major pastime would be living with these women and spending time with them, and they would take opium excessively, and many of them died for this reason very young. in their 40s and 50s, or hardly any of them made it to 60. But Aurangzeb was an exception, as we will see. So Jahangir died in 1627, and his son Shah Jahan came to power, and Shah Jahan governed for nearly 30 years. Again, this is not a history of Shah Jahan. You can go to books to study about Shah Jahan, whose reign was a very powerful reign. That was the peak of the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire had reached its peak financially, civilizationally, educationally, in terms of culture and literature. This was a very rich era during the Indian history. In fact, India never existed as a nation until the Mughals made it one. This is something the Indian nationalists, those who hate the Mughals, owe to the Mughals. Those Hindu nationalists today, or fundamentalists or extremists, who are very uneducated people in most cases, and that includes the Prime Minister of India currently, the one who is Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is actually an illiterate man, and his voters. So he's the Trump of India, and now you can imagine what I mean by that. Okay, look at the Trump voters in the US and look at Modi voters in India. There will be a lot of similarities there. So these people, they hate the Mughals with a passion, just because Mughals are Muslims, and they don't know much about Mughal history. And anyone who wants to put the record straight and clarify the history, they start hating those people with a passion. So Indian nationalists owe their identity to the Mughals, because Mughals made India as a united entity for the first time. Previous to the Mughal organization of Indian states into one body, India was made of a number of different dynasties, different states, different ethnicities. For example, Rajputs, they had their own region and they had their own governments. Then we had the Marathas in the south. Before the Marathas, there were Cholas and Vijayanagar, and there were other empires that governed. And then in the Deccan region, there were two other Muslim dynasties, although Shia. They were Bijapur and Golconda. So Mughal India was scattered. It were the Mughals, and in particular Aurangzeb, that united India as one entity, as one nation. So there was no India before the Mughals. There was a land called Hind, no doubt. The outsiders referred to India as Hind, but Hind had no set boundaries, no set definition. It could easily mean Northern India. It could mean Northern India. So coming back to Shah Jahan. So Shah Jahan in 1657 became ill, and there was a Mughal tradition of the emperor, when he would be in the capital, he would show himself on the balcony of the palace for the people to see him. So when people would see him, they would know the emperor is well, and they would pray for his well-being. So in 1657, September, in the month of September, Shah Jahan got ill, and he did not appear on the Jharoka. It was called Jharoka, the balcony. And people assumed that the emperor is dead, and he didn't appear for the next 10 days. So that strengthened the rumor. The rumor spread to the sons. Now, the Mughal emperors would definitely at times recommend or have someone to succeed them, right? They would have their favorites. For example, in this case, the favorite of Shah Jahan was his eldest son called Dara Shukoo. Dara Shukoo was a very free thinker, in the sense that he did not really see Islam as other ulama saw it, right? So he was more like Akbar. People, the ulama at the time in India, they feared Dara Shukoo because he was a free thinker, not in the sense as we know the term today, because today free thinker means something different. Free thinker at that time meant that this person could be a Muslim, he could be a non-Muslim, or he could be convinced by any other alien philosophy, for example, the Hindu philosophy. So he would mix with Sufis, he would mix with Hindu yogis and the Pandits and the Brahmins, and he would be learning their philosophies, and he would try to mix them up. So he actually wrote a text called Majma' al-Bahrain. Majma' al-Bahrain literally translated means the meeting of the two seas. In this book he argued that Hinduism and Islam is actually the same. They come from the same source. So they are pretty much the same religions because they teach very similar things. So when he wrote this book, the ulama of India became very vigilant, and they were against the idea of him succeeding his father as the emperor, because if he succeeded, then India would become another India of Akbar. When Akbar governed, when he initiated his own religion, Deen-e-Ilahi, as I mentioned earlier, he started to persecute the ulama who opposed him. In fact, some of the ulama, they called him Dalaluddin Akbar. You know, his name was Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, the name that was given to him at birth. But some of the ulama, they started to call him Dalaluddin, the misguidance of the deen, Akbar. Akbar means the biggest disbeliever in India. So some of the ulama actually declared him to be a disbeliever. So they were worried if Dara Shikoh came to power after his father, he would possibly do the same thing. He would start to persecute the ulama who would not agree with him. And a lot of the Indian nationalists nowadays, or a lot of the Western academics, they think that Dara Shikoh was a liberal. You know, as you know the term liberal today. Okay? As you know the term liberal today. Let me clarify something. No one was liberal before the rise of liberalism in the world. No one was truly liberal. If we were to apply current liberal values to pre-modern kings or early modern kings anywhere in the world, whether they were in Europe, whether they were in Asia, whether they were in Africa, wherever they may be, they were not liberals. They were simply kings trying to live their lives by their own standards. They were trying to be kings. And likewise, Mughals were kings in their own times. They fulfilled the requirements of their times. There was no liberalism then. There were no human rights then. And there were no human rights organizations like Amnesty International, and there was no one or no organization to overlook laws and rules for nations like the United Nations and things like that, or Geneva Convention. Of course, they had Islam. There were some who adhered to Islam. They followed Islam and Islamic principles, Islamic rights of humans and animals and others, right? There were others who did not follow those rules. So Dara Shikoh was not a liberal by any stretch of imagination. He was a Mughal prince who would have done exactly the same what Aurangzeb did later on. So now Dara Shikoh, being the eldest son and the favorite, and for that reason Shah Jahan kept him very close to himself within the court in Agra and Delhi. That was, Delhi was the capital. Agra was also a very important center of the Mughals close to Delhi. So Dara Shikoh was not a general. He was not trained as a general. He was a man of books. He was a man of philosophy. He was a thinker. He would spend a lot of time with thinkers of different persuasions, and he would be writing books. But on the other hand, Aurangzeb, who was disliked by his father, Shah Jahan, was thrown away into the empire at a very young age. So he was sent to Deccan when he was 18. Aurangzeb was born in 1618, and in 1636 he was sent away to Deccan to fight the wars of his father. So at a very young age, Aurangzeb was thrown into the thick of the battle. And because of that, he became a trained general. He knew the ins and outs of war. He was a military man. He was on the battlefield non-stop. And he was a very diligent military man. Very astute. He learnt the military skills and the arts of diplomacy that was required in India at the time. He knew who was who and where he needs to do what. He had all these ideas. So when Dara Shikoh had realized that Aurangzeb has become a very powerful military general who, and at the same time, remember, Aurangzeb was a religious man, unlike Dara Shikoor. Religious man in the sense that he was very close to the ulama and he demonstrated ability to uphold and support orthodoxy in India rather than some kind of heretical ideas like Dara Shikoor was seen by the ulama to be supporting. So that's why the ulama, they put their weight behind Aurangzeb. They wanted Aurangzeb to come to power after Shah Jahan dies. Dara Shikoor did not like his younger brother and continued to conspire against him in many ways. When Aurangzeb would be close to a victory, he would simply pull away the army. He would get his father to basically send orders to withdraw when Aurangzeb would be very close to victory. So Aurangzeb knew who was pulling the strings. It was his elder brother who was influencing the father to set policies against Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb had corresponded with his father extensively and he had complained to his father about his impossible situations, but Shah Jahan simply didn't like his son Aurangzeb and always found reasons to dislike him, even though Aurangzeb was a very obedient son. There is this book I recommend strongly to everyone. The title of the book is Aurangzeb and His Times, and it is written by Zahiruddin Farooqi, an Indian scholar, and it is full of information that you may not find in Audrey Trush's book, because this book is very brief. It's short and straight to the point, and it deals with major controversies about Aurangzeb's life. But this one is a lot more extensive, has a lot more details. Aurangzeb and His Times, Zahiruddin Farooqi, who has penned this book, and he has a lot of these letters Aurangzeb wrote to his father to convince him to be just to him. Cut the long story short, when Shah Jahan had become ill and people thought he had died, Aurangzeb was told that the king is dead. So was Murad. So was Shah Shuja. Shuja was the governor of Bengal. Murad was in Gujarat, Indian Gujarat, and Dara Shikoor was at the court, and Aurangzeb was in Deccan. So these four sons were in different places, staged differently. Now, amazingly, some people, when they read history of the Mughals, they look at these brothers at each other's throat. They think that these Mughals had no morality. They had no love for their blood. For this reason, you will find the Mughals killing their relatives very often. The Ottomans were doing the same thing, right? Sometimes we have these perceptions of angelic beings governing these states, and we turn them into saints. Like Audrey Trush talks about it, that there are two extremes about Mughal emperors, in particular about Aurangzeb, that the Muslims of India see him as a saint, right? And the Hindus of India see him as the devil incarnate. They see him as the sinner, right? So, and the truth is in the middle. He was neither a saint nor a sinner. He was just a king trying to govern his state to the best of his ability. Of course, he had his own views on religion. He was a very religious man, as we will see in due course. He implemented these policies which he saw as justice in India, and personally, he was a very pious man. This is why we are talking about Aurangzeb, not any other Mughal emperor, because he was the most Islamic king or the Muslim king out of all the Mughal emperors. He was responsible for a lot of Islamic projects, as I will talk about in due course, inshallah ta'ala. So, when Shah Jahan was ill, Aurangzeb heard about this. So he knew Dara Shikoor, if he comes to power, who was in the capital, he would not only execute Murad and Shuja, his two other brothers, he would happily execute Aurangzeb, because he is the one who was sabotaging all the activities of Aurangzeb and causing him problems and troubles. So what happened? Dara Shikoor, he started to conspire. He started to build an army so that he can face his brothers. He knew his brothers will come. They will come and contest the throne. Now, Shah Jahan had not died. He was still alive and he recovered from his illness. but the damage was done. The armies were already on the move. Aurangzeb left from Deccan, Murad left from Gujarat, and Shuja started to prepare also. So Aurangzeb and Murad, cut the long story short, met each other, and they decided that Murad will become the king. Aurangzeb is simply fighting to protect his life and his family. And the point I was going to make earlier, that these brothers, someone thinks, how can they fight wars with each other and kill each other like that and be so ruthless? And decline of a Mughal prince was not only decline of one man, it was the decline of his entire entourage that consisted of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people. If a Mughal prince was moving with his army, it would be a moving city. In fact, one of the European observers called Thomas Rowe observed the entourage of Jahangir when he was moving with his army. So it would take 24 hours from one point for the entire Mughal army to pass that point. Does that make sense? For the Mughal army to pass one point, it would take 24 hours. The caravan would be as long as 10 miles. It would consist of shops, markets, people selling meat, cloth, pots, spices, food, all the necessities, weapons, you name it. It would be a moving city. It would be a moving New York, put it this way, or moving London. Imagine that, right? It would be a city on the move. So these princes, they had states they were governing. These provinces, they ran into hundreds of thousands of squares of miles, and they were very powerful. They had a lot of money. So demise of one prince would mean the demise of his entire entourage. So that's why his party, wives, children, generals, soldiers, supporters would support them till the end. So these armies were on the move. So Murad and Aurangzeb, they met each other, and they decided that Murad would become king and Aurangzeb would take some governorship. But they have to confront Dara Shikoh. Dara Shikoh is the problem. He is the common enemy of us all, the eldest brother, who was seen as a heretic. They actually called him a kafir. They actually referred to him as the kafir. Okay, in correspondence with each other, and there's a historical record available where the princes, these three princes, referred to him as the murtad, basically, because he had expressed such ideas in his writings and his books. So no one wanted him in power, at least not these princes. So cut the long story short, there was a battle that took place between Dara Shikoh's armies and these two brothers. Dara Shikoh was defeated. He went back to Agra, and then another battle took place between Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh at a place called Samugarh, and Aurangzeb was victorious and Dara Shikoh was on the run, and he was on the run for nearly 2 years. He was running through the jungles of Punjab, Gujarat, and places like Rajasthan. Cut the long story short, he was betrayed by one of the people he had saved in the past, one of the chiefs at the border of Afghanistan. He was trying to cross into Persia because the Persian emperor had offered him refuge. So he was caught at the border and sent back to Delhi, and Aurangzeb got him paraded on top of an elephant and humiliated him publicly and executed him for apostasy or for heresy. So Dara Shikoh was out of the way. Now he turned to his other brothers, Murad and Shuja. Murad was, cut the long story short, arrested by Aurangzeb's strategy. Aurangzeb knew until, so long as these two brothers are alive, they will not let him govern in peace. There was a principle among the Mughal princes. There was a principle, and it was stated in Farsi, in the Persian language. It was Ya Takht, Ya Tabut. Who would like to translate that for me? Does anyone understand? The throne or the coffin. This is how the Mughal princes thought. When the father died, everyone would try his luck, whether it was a grandson or a son of the emperor. And these men could be in the 60s or 70s at the time when the father died, like it happened with Aurangzeb. When he died, 3 of his sons fought each other. So Mughals didn't have a system in place to appoint a successor. They would let the Mughal princes fight out their differences, right? And the one who was to be victorious would take the throne. And this is how it happened with Jahangir, and this is how Shah Jahan came to power. Shah Jahan had to execute one of his brothers, Dawar Bakhsh. Jahangir likewise poisoned, allegedly, one of his brothers called Danial to come to power. And now it was Aurangzeb's turn. Dara Shikoh was out of the way. Now he arrested Murad by deceiving him into a meeting. He was deceived to come and meet and discuss differences, and then he was arrested and he was executed in due course later on. And Shuja found safety in running away. So Shuja actually made his way to Burma, current day Burma, Myanmar, and it is thought that he was killed off by local chiefs there. So Aurangzeb in 1658 became the king. He became the king. So who is this man Aurangzeb? Why is he so important? Why are the Hindu nationalists in India so against him? Why is he so controversial? As I said, one of the reasons is that he was a very dedicated Muslim. Aurangzeb was a very strong Muslim. And when he came to power for the first 10 years of his power, he kept things as they were in the time of Shah Jahan. There was music at the court, wine drinking was allowed, and other things were happening. But 10 years after he came to power, he started to ban all these things, and he removed many of the Mughal traditions that were there. For example, Mughal dignitaries, when they would come to the court, they would actually bow in front of the king, and it was called Cornish. They would actually say salam, they would make a gesture with their hand 3 times, bow to acknowledge the superiority of the king, the emperor. He removed that practice. He said it's haram to bow to another man. He removed it. He was supported by ulama. There were ulama advising him. He had the company of the ulama. In fact, he memorized the Quran after he became the emperor, amazingly. He memorized the entire Quran after he became the emperor. Can you imagine a person becoming the emperor? When you become, usually what happened with the Mughals, when someone became the emperor, all hell was, broken loose. They would just go and attack the women, in the haram, and they would start drinking, and they would start having parties, and they would hardly care for the state affairs. But in this case, it reversed. When he came to power, previously Aurangzeb was just a standard Mughal prince. He possibly was involved in, he never used to drink, by the way, but he had his singing parties and all of that, and that went with the Mughal. But when he became king, he realized he has a responsibility now. This empire is upon his shoulders. So he has to be a good Muslim, and he has to be a good king, and thirdly, he has to be a good Muslim king. So these were his motives initially, which were clearly stated in his letters, and he would often rebuke his generals and his sons who would be governing on his behalf in different regions to do justice, even with the Hindus. Do not harass Brahmins. Do not push them around. Facilitate things for them. Okay, if Hindu pilgrims are coming to the temples, let them do it. He removed all the taxes imposed on the Hindus and the pilgrim sites imposed by previous emperors. He removed them. If anything, Aurangzeb actually was more pro-Hindu than all the Mughal emperors put together. Ironically, the Hindutva movement in India, for some reason, hates this man wrongfully. They are actually doing injustice to him. If they study his history carefully, as Adnan Rashid has shown in this book, that Aurangzeb, if anything, he was more lenient towards the Hindus than all the Mughal emperors put together before him. Because before him, the average of Hindu mansabdars, mansab is basically governorship or a position in the state. So 23% dignitaries within the Mughal state were Hindus. They had powerful positions. They were generals, they were governors, Hindus. They were finance ministers. They had ministries because they were effective ministers, right? So Aurangzeb's time, the number grew to 31%, more than half of what he inherited. So he had supported Hindus because of their abilities. In fact, he remembered one of his finance ministers until he died. His name was Raghunatha. Raghunatha was his finance minister only for 5 years, but Aurangzeb remembered him until the day he died. Until 1707, Aurangzeb would mention him, and he would say, "I wish I had him today with me," because he was such an effective finance minister. He took care of finances effectively. So all these accusations against him that he was an anti-Hindu king because he was a strong Muslim are false. So this is the easiest target the Hindus, extremist or Hindu right-wing parties in India, Bajrang Dal, BJP and Shiv Sena and all these people, they have made a narrative. You must have heard now in India that Muslims can be attacked anywhere in the rural areas, not in the cities, specifically speaking. In the rural areas, Muslims are being persecuted. So many videos have come out, I've seen them myself, where Muslims are being beaten by Hindu mobs and the police is doing nothing. Mosques are being attacked, right? And if someone's caught trading in cows, selling cows or buying cows, slaughtering is out of the question, they would kill him. Reports have come out, people have been killed for trading in cows. And amazingly, under this current government of India, which is a Hindu right-wing nationalist government, just like the Nazis, right? Under this current government, India is one of the largest beef exporters in the world, ironically. It doesn't make sense. Yani, if Muslims slaughter a cow, it's a crime. Death penalty, on the spot. Mob justice. But if the government does it to bring in money, billions of dollars, then it's okay. This is the point one of the Muslim leaders in India, known as Asaduddin Owaisi, he's a leader, upcoming leader from Hyderabad, and he's a very vocal leader of the Muslims, and he has raised these points on media as well, Indian media, and he is seen as a bogeyman as well. He is a villain to the Hindutva movement or the right-wing Hindu nationalist extremist movement, because he speaks the haqq, he speaks the truth, he shows them the mirror. And this is the point he raised, that you kill people for owning cows if they are Muslim, but your government is one of the largest exporters of beef in the world. Why are you selling? So if people eat cows outside of India, it is not blasphemy. You cannot eat cows inside India. That's the point he was making. So these are the people who hate anyone who had a strong attachment with Islam in Indian history. There are two individuals in particular that are hated by right-wing Hindu extremists in India. One is Aurangzeb Alamgir for his strong attachment to Islam and Muslims. I do apologize for the time because we started late, so we will pray Isha inshallah very soon. I will take a few more minutes to end, and then we'll pray Isha inshallah ta'ala after that.
Isha 7:30.
Yes, I know. We are, sorry, what's the time now?
Plenty of time.
Plenty of time. Sorry, I thought that was 7:42. Okay, that's 17:42. Okay.
It's 5:45,
So we have plenty of time. Okay, sorry. So I can continue. I can tell you about Babar, Humayun, Akbar and Shah Jahan. Yeah. Okay. So, are you getting bored, brothers and sisters? Maybe this is too much information to take in one day, but you can go and watch this lecture again. It will be edited, it will be professionally uploaded, and you can, inshallah, find it online after a few days, and you can listen to the dates and the facts and the names again, inshallah ta'ala. So, these people hate these two kings in particular for their attachment to Islam. There is no other reason. I'll tell you why there's no other reason. Because they were no different to other kings in India. In their wars, in the appointment or dismissal of Hindus, depending on what the reasons were, in their policies on temples and mosques, in their policies on Islam and Hinduism, in their policy in crushing rebellions, Aurangzeb and Tipu Sultan, who is the second figure, are no different to other kings in India. The other person, the Hindu right-wing extremist elements hate, is a man called Tipu Sultan, who was also a very strong Muslim, had a very strong attachment to Islam, and wanted the rise of Islam in India once again. He wanted the rise of Muslim civilization in India once again. And remember this, brothers and sisters, every time Muslims governed India, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect. Never do we claim a utopia in India. We don't. But we do claim that when the Muslims governed India, from the period that dates back to the 13th century, the Delhi Sultanate period, when the Turkic rulers came into India and they governed, and up to the Mughal period, Hindus, Muslims, Jains, Christians, when they came about, and even Sikhs, lived together in peace so long as all people wanted peace. Muslims governed all these people and gave them positions in the state, important positions, and governed them despite all the differences. But every time Hindus came to power, I'm not talking about Hindus today in India, because Hindu can mean anything. In fact, Audrey Trush, she raises a very interesting point that the term Hindu doesn't even appear in the Mughal chronicles. It is either Marathas, Rajputs, or other nations. They are referred to not as Hindus, but by their nations or by their tribes or by their regions. Because even Hindus were divided. There was no homogeneity. What's the word? Hindus were not homogeneous. They were not monolithic. Rather, they were diverse people with diverse beliefs, diverse ethnicities, diverse ideas. So for that reason, this new idea called the Hindu nationalism, again, is a new thing. It's a modern thing. It's a modern phenomenon which is full of Islamophobia, xenophobia, and extremism. And people talk about the Taliban and people talk about ISIS, in some cases rightly so, because these people were persecuting others. But what's happening in India in some cases is far worse than what ISIS and Taliban were doing. In fact, some of the Hindu extremists are doing worse things to Muslims than ISIS were doing to others. I'm making this claim boldly. There's no difference between them, if anything. There's no difference. So, why not call them to account? If the world media was crying, for example, if people were talking about ISIS, rightly so, and condemning their atrocities, rightly so, which we all condemn, what they were doing wrong, right? And when they were persecuting people, rightly so, why isn't the global media crying similarly about what the Hindu extremists are doing, or what the Buddhist extremists are doing in Burma? So there is some double standard, and this double standard is actually global, it's widespread. It is found in academia, it is found in political circles, it is found in economic circles, it is found in literary circles. Don't make a mistake, don't make any mistakes. It is there, it is real, okay? And that's why it finds support. Islamophobia is a multi-billion dollars industry. Islamophobia industry spends millions of dollars on spreading Islamophobia, right? So for this reason, some people were attacking this woman, this lady, for doing her job. She's a historian. She's a trained historian, Audrey Trush. She wrote this book and she made her life difficult. She's being attacked daily on Twitter, on social media, and Islamophobes in the US, people like Robert Spencer, who runs a website called the Jihad Watch, is attacking her on Twitter for doing history. She's a historian. She's a trained historian who knows Persian and Sanskrit. She has written history as she sees it. And she was yesterday, or the day before yesterday, she delivered a lecture in India, in Chennai. And she was heckled from the crowd. Of course, a lot of people supported her. They applauded her as well. There are many liberal, sane-minded, moderate Hindus in India who don't want this to happen, what's happening to Muslims. There are many good Hindus, I would say, in India who don't want Muslims to be killed and persecuted. So they support people like Audrey Trush and scholars who are doing objective work. But there are others. Now, she also tweeted today that outside a venue where she was due to speak. There is police and people are being searched. And she said, this shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be happening with scholars. We are scholars, we have opinions, and we should be free to express our opinions. We shouldn't be threatened with death and all that. So, coming back to the issue of brothers. So, Mughal princes, they were brothers, of course, and there was a reason why they were so cold towards each other. And let me explain why. Because when they were born, they were put under training. They were given military training, they were given basic education, and when they had reached their teenage, they were sent to the battlefield to prove their worth. So these brothers had no attachment. You know, like nowadays, you people live in your houses and you may have siblings, right? Yes, brothers and sisters? Yes, you may have siblings and you have very strong relationship with them. You know your sister, you know your brother, you see them every day, right? You have a laugh with them, you go out eating with them, you enjoy your time with them, right? You know them. But these Mughal princes, poor souls, as soon as they hit teenage, they would be sent to Gujarat. One is gone to Gujarat, one is gone to Bengal, one is gone to Deccan. And they wouldn't see each other for years. So they had no attachment with each other. And they had this assumption. It was already there that once the father, the emperor dies, we will be at each other's throat. Because all of them will have to fight it out. And it wasn't only about becoming an emperor, it was actually about saving your life. Because once you have lost the battle, you will die anyway. Because your brother who may come to power will pursue you until you're dead. So this was a battle for princes. As far as the princes were concerned, this was a battle of life and death. So it wasn't as simple as these killers, these murderers killing each other. You know, they were so selfish, so bad, so evil, they were just killing each other. No. It were the times they were living in. It were the traditions they had inherited. They had no other choice. They had to fight it out to protect their families and their lives. So it wasn't only about becoming an emperor, it was fighting for your lives. This is why ya takht, ya tabut. Either it is the throne or it is the coffin. One of these two. There is no third option for a Mughal prince once the father is dead. And this is exactly what happened with these four princes. So when Aurangzeb was about to execute Dara Shikoh, when he was brought to his court in Delhi, Aurangzeb asked him, what would you do if you were in my place? He asked his elder brother, who had lost the battle, lost the war, because as I said, Dara Shikoh was a man of books, he was not a man of the field. Aurangzeb was the battle-hardened man of the field, who had fought major battles in Indian history. In fact, he was so dedicated to his deen and to his work that during one of the campaigns in Afghanistan, within the battlefield, the time for Salah came and he dismounted his horse and he started to pray in the thick of the battle, in the middle of the battle, when arrows, cannonballs and swords and shields and spears are flying around. He is dedicated praying his Salah and his soldiers are all looking at him. This is how he actually modeled himself in front of his army. That's why they loved him very much, because he had high regard for Islam and Islamic values. So Dara Shikoh said in response to Aurangzeb's question that I would kill you and I would split you into pieces and hang your body parts in different parts of the empire. Very honestly, he said that to him, even though he was a prisoner, because he knew that Aurangzeb knows he would do exactly that. And then Aurangzeb, of course, followed suit and executed him and buried him next to his great-grandfather Humayun in the tomb of Humayun. So the other brother Murad was killed and Shuja was lost. He went. So Aurangzeb became the emperor in 1658 to govern India as the sole emperor. Now his task was to maintain order and he did his best. I cannot give you the details in this short lecture, but he became the most powerful king India ever experienced or witnessed. Okay, he had conquered by the end of his life 95% of India, the largest chunk of land ever governed by one Muslim king in the entire history, or by any king in the entire Muslim history. Sorry, the entire history of India. 95% of India. He had conquered land as far as Tamil Nadu by the time he died. And this stretch of the empire actually became a detriment, because his resources and his forces were stretched to the farthest end of the Indian peninsula. He was weakened because of that. It was only the matter of time. Someone was to hit a weak point and the empire would start to crumble without a strong leader. So Aurangzeb was a very strong leader, of course, no doubt. He lived for 88 years. He died in 1707, actually 89 years. And he governed with iron fist. He was a soft man, no doubt, but he did not forgive rebellions from his family. He did not forgive his family. He forgave his generals occasionally, his dignitaries or his mansabdars, but he did not forgive his family. For example, one of his sons called Akbar, who was sent to crush a rebellion, a Rajput rebellion. When he went there, he crushed the rebellion, but then he declared himself to be the king on top of his father. So Aurangzeb was furious. He sent an army after him, and then Akbar was hounded within India for a very long time, and then he escaped to Persia. Persia would be a very convenient refuge for Mughal princes and Mughal fugitives, because Persians would happily, being Shia at the time, would happily receive dissenters from Mughal India in case they can be used as puppets, like the British Empire did for a very long time, and the British are doing to this day. A lot of the dissenters from different countries, they find political asylum where? In Britain. You know Altaf Hussain? Yes? You know Altaf Hussain? Who knows him? Who knows the Qaid? He lives very close to me, by the way. Altaf Hussain is a mass murderer. Everyone knows that in Pakistan. He's a mass murderer. Okay? He has killed hundreds of thousands of people, indirectly, and directly possibly thousands of people. Okay? And he led a nationalist movement called the Muhajir movement. Right? And he found political asylum in Britain. Despite all those crimes committed by him, he was given asylum here, and he's still here. He's still living in Britain, and he has no serious problems living here. So the issue is, likewise, Persians would give refuge to any Mughal emperor on the run or a prince on the run, so that they can use him for the future. And Persians were against the Mughal empire. Mughals were Sunnis. The Persians were Shia, right? And there was antagonism between both empires. The Persians, the Safavids, were very powerful, immensely powerful. At the same time, Mughals were very powerful. Mughals had the gold of India. The Mughals had the power, the strength, despite its diversity of India, right? The Persians were also very powerful, but they never had the guts to invade India. But what they did was they invaded occasionally Afghanistan, because even Afghanistan was governed by the Mughals, right? Up to Kabul, Kandahar, this was all under Mughals. You will see coins from Jahangir's time and Shah Jahan's time and even Aurangzeb's time, coins minted in Kabul and Kandahar, cities like that. Kandahar was, of course, lost to Persians in the time of Shah Jahan, and Shah Jahan tried to take it back, and Aurangzeb was one of those people who tried hard, unsuccessfully, to take it back from Persians. He was not able to do it. So Persians were also important players. That's why Akbar, Aurangzeb's son, when he rebelled, was given refuge in Persia. So Aurangzeb never forgave him. Never. He died in Persia in 1704, 3 years before his father died. Akbar, he spent the rest of his life in Persia, never came back to India. Likewise, other sons of his or grandsons, if they made a mistake, something that threatened the stability of the state, he was ruthless. At other times, Aurangzeb Alamgir crushed rebellions ruthlessly. He was doing the job of a good Indian king in his times. You see, a lot of the people now criticize kings of that time for doing what they did. And they apply modern, secular, liberal standards to those kings. But they didn't live in this age. They were not ruled by these conventions or these norms or these sentiments. Right? Imagine Aurangzeb was to catch rebels, and instead of making them an example, he would say, oh, this poor man, he's going to be in pain. You know? And then all these human rights organizations come along and they say, no, you have to put him on trial, give him justice, None of that existed at the time. Kings had to make examples out of rebels. And this is exactly what a good king would do. And if a king who was soft and weak would be seen as a sitting duck, he would be a fair game. You know, he would be attacked. Very soon others will start to... So every time a rebel or a rebellion was crushed, it was crushed severely to make an example out of them. And this is exactly what happened to Guru Tegh Bahadur, the 9th Guru of the Sikhs. Every Sikh you talk to, mention the word Aurangzeb, they will know him. Have you had this experience? Yes? Yes or no? Yes? Every Sikh, you know, for example, like the Shia, every Shia person you talk to, they will know the name Yazid, yes? Yes or no? Yes? Yazid, Muawiyah, yes? They know these names because they see them as arch enemies of the Ahlul Bayt. Likewise, when you speak to a Sikh person, when you mention Aurangzeb, Aurangzeb is Yazid to the Sikhs, or Fir'aun to the Sikhs, because he killed the 9th Guru, and the 10th Guru was also fought by the Mughal armies, and 2 of his sons died in war, and the Sikhs blame Aurangzeb Alamgir directly because he was the emperor and the governor of Sirhind, who was the governor. His name was Wazir Khan. But if you look at the other side of the coin, from the Mughal perspective, the king was simply crushing rebellions. Tegh Bahadur, the 9th Guru of the Sikhs, was devastating the Punjab. He was devastating villages. He was devastating the countryside. He was creating chaos. He was killing people, including Muslims, in many of the Punjabi villages. And the Sikh version goes that he was fighting for the rights of the Kashmiri Pandits because they were being forced into Islam, and the Guru Tegh Bahadur stood up for their rights, and that's why he was killed. But that's not the truth. The truth historically, actually that stuff is very difficult to establish. These are narratives created very late by the Sikhs. Later on, almost a century later, these stories were made up and they were made popular. Like, you know, the stories of Karbala. Have you ever been to a sitting in Muharram, or have you ever watched it on TV? How the Shia Dhakirin, the Shia storytellers, they talk about the story of Karbala, what happened. And they have so many details. They have so many details that Abbas did this, Hussein said this, Zainab cried and she said this. Yes? Sakina said this. They have so many narratives, so many details, as if there were clerks working continuously, taking notes, standing next to them in war. Yeah, she said this, I'll note this. She said this, I'll note this. She said this, I'll note this. So much discussion and dialogue between individuals in the middle of the battle. Impossible. Any historian with 2 brain cells would know that this is all made up. This cannot, and in fact, when you do dig deeper, you come to realize that these stories don't actually reach the actual source. They are just dubious stories told by people later on. There is very little authentically known about what exactly happened in the Battle of Karbala. We do know Hussein radiallahu anh was killed. We do know he was oppressed. We do know the mujrims killed him. We do know the names of the people, but we don't know the dialogues the discussions they were having between each other. We don't have those details from authentic sources. Likewise, the Sikhs have these stories, these narratives, that the grandmother was talking to the grandsons in this way, and they said this and they said that, and the details are so many that anyone thinking, hold on a second, can this story be true? Where did the details come from? What is the source? And when you dig deeper, the source is not there. It doesn't reach the actual person it is attributed to. So Aurangzeb is maligned by the Sikhs for this reason, but he was doing the job of a king. He was doing exactly what was required of him. Punjab was his region. He governed it. He had to maintain peace on the roads, so people are not being robbed like the Sikhs were doing. Later on, Sikh rebellions, they took such an intense form that the Sikhs were robbing, burning, pillaging Muslim villages at will. There was a Sikh rebel called Banda Singh Bahadur, who was eventually killed by an emperor later on called Farrukh Siyar. He was ravaging the Muslim villages and Muslim regions. So, we'll pause for a second. I hope you guys are not getting bored. So, Aurangzeb Alamgir is maligned for that reason by the Sikhs, that because the 9th Guru was killed and the 10th Guru was on the run and he was also hunted down. But eventually we have historical sources that he actually sought pardon from the emperor and Aurangzeb let him go. Okay, fine. You want to come to terms? You want to behave yourself? No problem. Go ahead, behave yourself. No problem. You see, the Sikh Gurus were not as significant as they are today. At that time, they became important to Sikhs later on, right? And this is why you don't even find them mentioned in the Mughal sources. They were just insignificant rebels doing rebellions in the Punjab. Mughal state was concerned about bigger issues like the Marathas in the south. So that is one thing. Then Aurangzeb's anti-Hindu policy. Was he an anti-Hindu king? No, he was not. He was not. Because when you look at his state, he had Hindu generals, Hindu treasurers, finance minister was Hindu. Okay, there were Hindu dignitaries, Rajputs who owned the land of Mewar and Marwar. These two in Rajasthan today, you know the area called Rajasthan, this was governed by the Rajputs and they were given high positions in the state. And you know how the Mughal mansabs worked is another question altogether, but I don't want to complicate things too much. I want to keep it simple. They would be counted by the amount of military men a person would be given by the state. For example, there would be Panj Hazaris in Persian language, the one who has a force of 5,000 cavalry or 10,000 cavalry or 15,000 cavalry or 20,000 cavalry. So their rank would be raised by the amount of cavaliers they would have in the forces. So a lot of the Hindu generals or rulers or rajas who were vassal states working within the Mughal Empire were given high positions by Aurangzeb. As I said, 31% of the Mughal dignitaries in the time of Aurangzeb were Hindus. In fact, during the War of Succession, when 4 brothers fought each other, during that war, 23 Hindu generals or rajas sided with Dara Shikoh, 21 sided with Aurangzeb. If Aurangzeb was a religious bigot, as the Hindu nationalists claim today, why would 21 rajas, important Hindu figures within India, side with Aurangzeb and fight for him and kill and die for him? Can you imagine Hindu forces, Rajputs and Marathas fighting for Aurangzeb and dying for him? So there is a reason for this current hatred. One of the reasons is the story of Shivaji. Shivaji was a Maratha figure from the south of India who had resisted Mughal power in the south, and he had rebelled against the Mughals and he was taking forts and he was troubling the Mughal army. He pursued guerrilla tactics, and Mughals were obviously pursuing conventional military style of invasion of the south. So he was harassing the Mughals for a very long time. Even at that time, he was not as significant as he became later on to the Hindu nationalists. Shivaji died soon after, and his son Sambhaji, who continued, and he was arrested and he was executed by the orders of Aurangzeb. So the hatred for Aurangzeb is there because of the rebellion of Shivaji, and Shivaji has been turned into something he was not. Right? You see, a lot of these extremist Hindus who are in India today, Hindu nationalists in particular, they make up stories and they inflate the stories and they treat it as history. They treat it as history. And they spread these lies in the name of history. This is why they hate historians like obliged. And there are others who are writing on Aurangzeb. Some have simply shut their mouths in India. They don't want to die. They don't want to kill. They don't want to get killed. That's why they don't talk in history anymore. Some of the major authorities on history in India, they don't open their mouths anymore. They are not publishing on these sensitive matters. This woman is truly brave who has published this book and literally put her life in danger. And she has the audacity to even travel to India and lecture on Aurangzeb. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, she was lecturing. Go and check her on Twitter, obliged. You can look at the book afterwards when I'm finished, inshallah ta'ala. So Aurangzeb was a very Muslim king. He penned Qur'ans in his own hands, and he, according to some reports, made caps with his own hands and he sold them for living, but I don't know how true these stories are. But he did pen Qur'ans in his own hand. At least 2 to 3 copies were penned by him within his lifetime, and he would pray diligently. He was a very, very pious Muslim, no doubt. Personally, he was a very pious Muslim. We don't know how Muslim he was as a king. Was he a good Muslim king or not is another question. He did impose jizya in 1675 or 1676. 1676 he imposed jizya because of the Rajput rebellion. Rajputs rebelled against him. Rajputs were a very powerful, strong entity within India who represented Hindu power at the time, and they were mainly Mughal vassals. They worked with the Mughals. At times when they found them to be weak, they did rebel, and a rebellion was taking place in 1670s, and as an opposing gesture, Aurangzeb Alamgir imposed jizya. And jizya was not, of course, collected widespread in India. It wasn't successfully collected always, but he did impose jizya. And this is one of the reasons cited by right-wing Hindu nationalists that he imposed jizya. But jizya was there in the time of Akbar. Akbar lifted jizya when he apostatized. He lifted jizya and he imposed other taxes on Hindus. Amazingly, jizya was less than other taxes imposed by Akbar on Hindu pilgrim sites. But Aurangzeb came to power. When he came to power in 1670s, he imposed jizya and he removed all those taxes. And this affected the Mughal treasury daily. This costed the Mughal treasury daily because he was getting hundreds of thousands of rupees every month from these pilgrim sites. And I'll show you what a Mughal rupee looked like. I have one with me today so that you can all have a look. And it belongs to Aurangzeb. And we will put it on screen. Pounds have come out, sorry. But I hope it's there. I did put it in my pocket, and I hope I haven't lost it. It seems, you see, I have a principle that when you look for something, you never find it. Sorry, it seems to have been lost. I'll look for it later, and if I find it, I'll show it to you. Maybe it's in the other pocket. Actually, it might be in this pocket. Do apologize for the... Yeah, I did bring one with me, but I cannot find it now. But Mughal rupee was simply 11 grams of silver. Found it. Okay, this is a rupee minted during the Aurangzeb period. It is pure silver. 11.4 grams of silver. This is the Mughal rupee, and this was minted in a city called Thatta. Thatta is in Sindh, in current day Pakistan, and that was a very big Mughal center of power, and it was a huge city at the time. And this is a coin minted during the reign of Aurangzeb. It has the name of the king, Aurangzeb Alamgir. Okay, it says, yeah. So you can have a look at it afterwards. You want to have a look now? Yeah? Okay, go ahead. Okay. So what happened? The jizya he imposed actually caused more loss to the treasury than benefit. But he did it because he saw it as an Islamic duty, as a Muslim king. At the same time, there were strategic reasons for it, to punish the Rajputs for their rebellion. And he imposed the jizya as a discriminatory, possibly discriminatory measure. It is very possible he did that for a reason, I'm not too sure. Plus also to win the ulama over to his cause, which was already done during the War of Succession. Ulama were with him. Also in 1668, Aurangzeb started another project. And a project he is very little known for, unfortunately, even within the Islamic circles. Are there any Hanafi brothers here? Hanafi brothers. Put your hands up. Why are you hesitant? Okay. Brothers, let me ask you. You know what is the largest compendium of the Hanafi fiqh? The largest collection of Hanafi opinions on jurisprudential matters. Fataw-i-alamgiri. Yes? Why is it called Alamgiriya? That literally translated means rulings of Alamgir. But they're not Alamgir. Aurangzeb was his name, and Alamgir, the word Caesar. The word Caesar was his title, and he literally seized the world. You know, he governed 95% of India. So that was one of his greatest services to the Hanafi fiqh in particular, and to Islam in general. Okay, the compilation of Fatawa-i-alamgiriya. Okay, I know the Salafis and the Ahlul Hadith do not agree with that fiqh. I know that. Okay, but it is the greatest achievement as far as the Hanafi school of thought is concerned. This collection of Fatawa outdid the previous collections of Hanafi Fatawa like Fatawa Qazi Khan, Fatawa Tatar Khaniya. There were other Fatawas, but they were smaller in length. But this was a very huge compilation. It took a number of ulama, dozens of ulama, 7 years to complete it. The project was started at the behest of the emperor in 1668, and it took 7 years, but it was completed by 1675. The Fatawa-i-alamgiri was complete as a project, and it contains rulings from the Hanafi viewpoint on different matters. It is basically law. It is law. And this collection then was sent to Qudat, Qazis all over India, to govern by this law. So they would rule, especially in Muslim affairs, looking at Fatawa-i-alamgiri. And it is the largest collection of Hanafi fiqh opinions in the world to date. It is very big, depending on who publishes it. It runs into volumes, right? So that was one of his achievements. And amazingly, one of the scholars who was very, very well appreciated and well known, called Shah Waliullah ad-Dehlawi, who lived in the 18th century, who was born when Aurangzeb was still alive. Shah Waliullah was born in 1704, Aurangzeb died in 1707. Shah Waliullah's father, Shah Abdur Rahim, was one of the scholars who was actively involved, reluctantly, albeit reluctantly, in the compilation of this fatwa. The reason why he was reluctant was because he didn't like to be too close to the state. He was a pious man, was down to earth, he didn't want to be too close to the king, but when the king Aurangzeb asked him to take part, because he was a renowned scholar, Shah Abdul Rahim, the father of Shah Waliullah, when he was asked by the king to take part, he refused to take part. But then his mother, Shah Abdul Rahim's mother, she encouraged him and said, it is a good deed, you should take part and ignore the state affairs, and you don't have to get involved in the state too much. And then he took part. So fataw-i-alamgiri was completed that way. And then the same man had a son called Shah Waliullah later on, who became a great scholar. Also, another great service of Aurangzeb to Islam, which will never be forgotten, which will remain until the day of judgment, I believe, is, apart from fataw-i-alamgiri, is what? Anyone? Any guesses? Who wants to guess? Where's my coin gone? It's disappeared. No, it's just okay. So, any guesses? Who's been to Lahore? Put your hands up. Yeah. Now everyone woke up. Badshahi Mosque. When you enter Lahore from the old road, not from the motorway, from the old road, the first thing that hits you, and you are struck by a sense of awe. It is so wonderful. It is so powerful, the sight of the Badshahi Mosque, the famous, literally translated, the King's Mosque or the Royal Mosque. It was built by Aurangzeb Alamgir's orders. It was built in 1670s. Of course, it took a few years for it to be completed. And the name of the king, Aurangzeb Alamgir, is written at the gate on marble plaques. And this was the largest mosque in the world. This was the largest mosque in the world at the time. Of course, now we have bigger mosques today. But at the time, in the 17th century, it was the largest masjid in the world. And it is an absolutely amazing sight. You have to go and look at it to understand what I'm talking about. The artwork, the strength of the Muslim civilization in India, and the sense, you have to take your children to it. If you go to Pakistan next, go and take your children to Lahore and show them the Badshahi Mosque and explain to them how it was made and who made it and why it was made. And they will never forget it. You want your children to admire Islam and its history, then you must show them the achievements of Islam and Muslims. That's when they will actually start to understand what Islam has achieved in the past. This was a huge achievement on the part of Aurangzeb Alamgir, rahmatullah alayh. So he surpassed, if not equaled, his father in building monuments when he had sanctioned this particular masjid. And this was a great achievement for Islam and Muslims in India. Other achievements of Aurangzeb Alamgir is providing patronage to ulama. He supported ulama, and this was the golden age of Islam and Muslims in India. The amount of manuscripts penned during the time of Aurangzeb is immense. So many Qur'ans. I personally own copies, handwritten copies from that period, and where the scribe would write at the end that this particular copy was transcribed in the such and such year of the reign of Aurangzeb Alamgir, the blessed king, or the great king, or whatever the titles were, okay, and the date would be there, and the place of writing or transcribing the Quran would be there. And then there are other compendiums like books written on fiqh, on hadith, tafasir, okay, shuruhat on hadith. A great scholar called Abdul Haq Muhaddis Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh was born during the reign of Akbar and died in the reign of Aurangzeb Alamgir, had written commentaries on Mishkat, on Bukhari, for example, and some of them I own myself personally. In my personal library, I have the manuscripts from that period where the King Aurangzeb is mentioned. Even Hindus were writing books in Persian. I have a manuscript in my personal library, in my possession, where a Hindu called Ram Singh has transcribed a manuscript on the Muslim pious figures from India. Some of the pious figures You know, those big shrines in India nowadays, Moinuddin Chishti and Nizamuddin Awliya and Sayyid Ali Hijweri in Lahore, and these people, they were very much venerated in India at the time. India was predominantly Sufi, Hanafi Sufi at the time, until things started to change in the 18th century after the writings of Shah Waliullah, and then in the 19th century things moved further towards drifting away into Ahlul Hadith movement. Became very prominent in the 19th century, and many thousands of Muslims became Ahlul Hadith because they found that way to be closer to the Sunnah. This was their view, of course. So at that time, at Aurangzeb's time, India was very much Sufi Hanafi, and Aurangzeb himself was very much a Sufi king. He was like, you know, he had Sufi inclinations, and you couldn't expect any better from him. You know why? Because that's all there was in India. That was the Islam of India. Even the muhaddiseen who were writing commentaries on Bukhari and Mishkat, and people who were writing tafsir on the Quran were heavily influenced by Sufism. Okay, India was heavily influenced by Sufism and whatever came with it. But later on, Shah Waliullah rahmatullah, Muhaddis al-Dehlawi, challenged a lot of these non-Islamic Sufi practices in India that had taken the continent. For example, grave tomb veneration and things like that. And even Shah Waliullah penned a very important book on that later on, Al-Balagh al-Mubin, which is very little known, unfortunately, to people. So continuing with Aurangzeb. So Aurangzeb had done these services to Islam, and because of his patronage and his support of Muslim ulama and scholars, many people had benefited from his work. Now, after 1681, Aurangzeb had moved to the south of India. He spent the latter part of his reign in the Deccan region, or in the south of India. He never returned to Delhi again. From 1681 to 1707, Aurangzeb Alamgir remained on the battlefield. He remained on the move. He was crushing rebellions staged against him by the Marathas, who were Hindus, and he felt it necessary to crush two Shia states in the south, the state of Bijapur and Golconda. This was primarily due to two reasons. One reason was the Persian emperor behind Aurangzeb in Persia was Shah Abbas II, who was continuously threatening Aurangzeb with an invasion. And because Bijapur and Golconda were two very strong, powerful states in the south of India, Aurangzeb was in fear that if Persia was to invade, then of course Golconda and Bijapur, being Shia states, would side with Persia, and Aurangzeb would be trapped in the middle. For that reason, Aurangzeb in 1685 invaded the south, these two southern states, and in 1686 Bijapur capitulated. It was occupied by Aurangzeb forces, and then Golconda, which was the hub of diamonds and precious stones, the biggest mine in the world until South African diamonds were discovered, or diamonds were discovered in Sierra Leone and other African countries. Until then, the biggest supplier of diamonds in the world was Golconda. You know the Kohinoor diamond, the famous Kohinoor diamond, the crown jewel, you know, the one in Queen Elizabeth's crown. You know the Kohinoor diamond? Yeah, it came from that very mine, Golconda mine. It is thought it came from there, and it was in Mughal possession. Actually, that diamond was in Aurangzeb's throne, the peacock throne, the one Aurangzeb would sit on and govern the state affairs. That diamond was studied in that throne until later on, after the decline of the Mughal Empire, the Persian ruler Nadir Shah invaded in 1739, and he plundered the Mughal treasury and took the throne with him. The throne was broken up, and all the jewels, rubies, diamonds and emeralds were taken off the throne, and then they were kept as separate stones, and then later on they were traveling around. They ended up with the Duranis, the Pashtuns, and then cut the long story short, there's a book written on Kohinoor diamond, very interesting book. If you want to learn history of the diamond, and with the diamond you learn the history of the region and who governed the region, at the time. You must look at this history of Kohinoor, written by William Dalrymple. William Dalrymple has written this history of Kohinoor, very recently published again. Very interesting history, you should read it. Where the diamond went and how many hands it passed through. It ended up with Ranjit Singh, the Sikh ruler of Punjab, and then the British confiscated it from the young Raja called Duleep Singh, and then it ended up with Queen Victoria, and Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, decided to sharpen it, and the diamond was cut to half its size, unfortunately, and now it is in the crown of Queen Elizabeth, lo and behold. Okay, so coming back to Aurangzeb, so he 1681 onwards, he stayed in the south. He stayed in the south. Never returned to Delhi, never returned to north, ever, because of two reasons. One was to crush rebellions. Second was to maintain his occupation. Sometimes, you know, for kings and governments, maintaining an occupation becomes a matter of ego, or a matter of honor and dignity of the state. Let me give you one current example, very important example. Why, when nations invade territory, they must think very carefully. If they don't think carefully, if they don't plan carefully, that invasion can either make or break. I'll repeat, if you invade another country's territory, and if you don't plan, if you don't do your pros and cons properly, you can either make yourself or you can break yourself. One very important example, Russia. Russia invaded Afghanistan, and Russia threatened Pakistan that once we are dealt with Afghanistan, which is a land of farmers and illiterate people, we will be in Karachi within weeks. And Pakistan fought a war for its survival. Pakistan, as far as Pakistani government at the time was concerned, they were fighting a war for their survival. That's why the CIA came in with weapons, money, and the Afghan Mujahideen were supplied with these weapons, and then they fought the Russians, fighting a war for Pakistan, for America indirectly as well, and for their own freedom. Of course, there was a mixture of motives and mixture of things going on there. So it was not as simple as, you know, of course, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan were freedom fighters at the time. Remember, President Reagan, he came and he said, these are very honorable people defending their honor, right? They are defending the honor and the land and the country against the beer, against the aggressor, the Russian aggression, right? And then Rambo 3 was made as well. Have you seen Rambo 3? Who has seen it? You must watch it, right? Rambo 3, Sylvester Stallone seen walking around the streets of Peshawar, right? To show, to highlight the very point that these are our people, these are our men fighting a war, right? But for Russia, it was a devastating blow. To their shock, and I have very little time, I want to finish very quickly, I wish I could have more time to talk about this. To their shock, they lasted in there for 10 years, and they lost thousands of men, billions of dollars, and they had to withdraw. And that withdrawal was not a withdrawal from one territory. That withdrawal from Afghanistan caused a withdrawal from entire Central Asia, right? They had to withdraw from Central Asia. So Aurangzeb Alamgir, for that reason, when he was fighting in the south, and the reason he never made it back to the north, to Delhi, how many years is that? 1681 to 1707. 26 years of his life on the battlefield, on the move. Because he wanted to maintain his occupation of the south. Call it ill-planned, call it unwise, call it what you like. But that was the situation he was in. So in 26 years, he was frequenting the jungles of Tamil Nadu and, you know, Maharashtra and Deccan and all these regions he was fighting there. And if he lost that territory, he would have possibly lost a lot more in India. to maintain his occupation of India, he had to pursue that long, painful war. A lot more can be said about Aurangzeb. I'll make the final point and we will end the lecture and we will go to Salah and then Q&A inshallah afterwards. Final point I want to make is that one of the things he is accused of is temple desecrations. He was demolishing temples. He was demolishing temples. Okay, there's a chapter in this book of obliged where she talks about Aurangzeb's patronage of temples. There are other examples which Hindu right-wing nationalists, Islam haters, Muslim haters, Islamophobes don't mention, is the fact that Aurangzeb provided support, patronage, wages for Brahmins, priests, people working with these temples, hundreds of thousands of rupees from his own treasury. Of course, he was the king and these were his subjects. It was his job, his duty to maintain their well-being. So he was providing support to thousands of temples. There are hundreds of thousands of temples in India to this day that predate, thousands that predate the Mughal era. Hundreds of thousands that were built during the Mughal era, right? If the Mughals were on this rampage policy to destroy every single temple in India, then they would have been doing it, right? But they only destroyed a handful of temples. Definitely, there's no doubt that Aurangzeb destroyed temples in Varanasi and Mathura. There were temples destroyed by him for political reasons, because certain temples were directly attached to political powers. In India, temple desecrations was the norm of wars. Hindu kings were doing it to other Hindu kings and other Hindu states. Muslims were doing it to Hindus and Hindus were doing it to Muslims. Right? So why were temples being destroyed in India? Every time there was a war, temples were... Because the deity in the temple was directly linked to the power of the king. If the temple was destroyed and the deity was broken, it would be seen as a bad omen for the king and the morale of the army would decline immediately. There's a movie, I don't like talking about movies too much, but I only want to draw your attention to historic movies or something that you learn from. Troy, yes? And there's a scene in Troy where Achilles, he invades this territory. I forgot the name of the territory. Sparta? No, not Sparta, sorry. Troy, the city of Troy, right? So he attacks this territory, and the first thing he does is to go to the temple and he cuts off the head of the deity called Apollo, so that the morale of the army is complete. Because when the deity is destroyed, it's broken, then the natural outcome is the god could not protect himself. The god could not protect his temple. If the temple is gone, then everything is gone. For that reason, Indian kings, when they would invade other Indian territories, the first thing they would do is go to the temple and destroy the temple. Aurangzeb, for the same reason, when there were rebellions or when there was disobedience on the part of some Hindu kings and rajas, sent his forces into these territories and destroyed the temples. In other territories, he provided patronage. He provided money for those temples, and the details are in this book of obliged. You can go to chapter 6 of obliged's book, Aurangzeb. Chapter 6 talks about, and there's a heading, protector of temples. Aurangzeb, protector of temples. And she gives all the names of temples he gave money to, and where he was paying wages of the priests and Brahmins as a king. He's a king, and it is his job now to take care of because if she's charging them jizya, obviously it is his job to protect their temples and provide patronage. And then there's another heading, destroyer of temples. One is protector of temples, where he's providing patronage to hundreds of temples. And then there are destroyed temples, which also run into dozens, and they were destroyed for political reasons, not because he was a religious bigot. He had a policy to destroy all the temples. So this is why Aurangzeb has been attacked recently by the Hindus for destroying temples and seen as a villain. That's why recently a road in Delhi, in the city of Delhi, which was named after Emperor Aurangzeb, the name of the road was changed to Abul Kalam, the ex-president of India, road. and Aurangzeb was removed from history, and his history is being changed slowly. That's why this lady called Audrey Trush came forward, and she wrote this book to put the record straight, and she's facing a lot of hatred and insults on social media in particular, and in her life in general. So, brothers and sisters, Aurangzeb died in 1707, having governed for 49 years, a very powerful king, a very pious Muslim king. He was seen near the end of his life when he was in his 80s. He would be carried through the crowds of people by his army, his forces. He would be seen in his palanquin. Palanquin was this, what we call doli in Pakistan, you know. The king would be sitting in that. And one of the European observers, if I'm not mistaken, either Manucci or Bernier, one of them, he stated that he saw the king going through this crowd in his palanquin. He did not look up once. He did not look up once at the people. What was he doing? Looking down and reading the Quran. This is a European observer. He saw the king when he was in his old age, very old, over 80 years old. He was looking down and he was reading the Quran. He was not interested in anything else. He was, as far as historic record is concerned, he was mistreated by his father unfairly, because his father loved his older brother more than him. He remained obedient to his father for a very long time. He wrote letters to his father trying to convince him to do justice, but his father was failing to do justice. And when he came to power in 1658, he had imprisoned his father. Shah Jahan lived for another 7 years, who was in confinement under house arrest. He was given an apartment within the within the fort of Agra, and he could see directly the tomb of his wife Mumtaz Mahal, which he himself built, the Emperor Shah Jahan. And many people accused Aurangzeb of mistreating his father. But when you look at history carefully, you come to realize Aurangzeb had no other choice. His father was thirsty of his blood. His father even tried to get him killed. In fact, when Aurangzeb had occupied Agra, his father Shah Jahan, tried to deceive him into a trap which Aurangzeb had discovered. And for that reason, Aurangzeb was worried about his own life. He had no other choice. His father was siding with the older brother, and that's why he confined his father to the fort in Agra, and his father died 7 years later. So Aurangzeb died in 1707, and his successors could not hold on to power for much longer, having governed for 49 years. After Aurangzeb died, in 13 years, there were 5 or 6 Mughal kings. So for the last century and a half, there were 6 Mughal kings. There was Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. But within 13 years after Aurangzeb's death, there were 13 Mughal kings. They killed off each other. There were wars of succession. Mughal empire was weakened. Other people took advantage. The Sikhs rose. Sikhs realized the center is now weak. Let's occupy Punjab. And they wreaked havoc in the Punjab region, and they started invading villages, burning, pillaging, raping. Everything was going on. Marathas, they became bolder, and they started to attack the north. The Jats became bolder, and the British finally, in the mid 18th century, about 50 years after Aurangzeb's death, exactly 50 years after Aurangzeb's death, the British defeated the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dawla, in the Battle of Plassey, and lo and behold, the rise of the British Empire, or British colonialism in India, which is another topic in itself. And then British ruled until 1947, when they had to leave India shamefully. It was a shameful flight. Thank you so much for listening. I hope we covered a lot. There was a lot to internalize. I hope this lecture benefited you. I hope I did justice to Aurangzeb's vast history. We cannot possibly cover every single aspect of his life in such a short lecture. I do strongly recommend, if you want a shorter introduction to Aurangzeb's life, an objective writing, Aurangzeb by Audrey Trush, or if you want a lengthy discussion on Aurangzeb, it is Aurangzeb and His Times by Zahiruddin Farooqi. And if you want to go further, read another book by Jadunath Sarkar. Sarkar was actually not an admirer of Mughals or Muslims. He was biased. There's no doubt he was a biased historian, but his history is the most extensive history of Aurangzeb. You will find a lot of information there, but be aware that he was biased, he was Hindu, and he didn't like Mughals much. So that's it for now. Jazakumullahu khairan for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Yes, please. So what's the time now? So Q&A. So brothers and sisters, we will go straight to Q&A now. Because Salah is 7:30. Sorry?
I just wanted to see the coin.
Yeah. Okay, after the Q&A we can do that. You can have a look, you can take a picture of it. No problem. I'll tell you later. Ask this question in the Q&A and we'll. So now, brothers and sisters, we go to Q&A. Is that okay? Yeah, no problem.
Brothers, yeah. We have time. Everything. We have and we will allow the sister as well to go.
I think it was no problem. Don't worry about it. We'll sit together one day and we'll go through it and add the images.
Okay. Once I've read it, then we can do it. Because it's going to take a while to do this.
Okay.
Here and then.
But as you know, the topic was.
It's a big topic. It's not a small topic.
Yeah. But I'll tell you one thing. This will be one good introduction out there. Inshallah. Okay, so brothers and sisters, you can ask questions if you have any. I'll do my best to answer them. And sorry? Yeah, take the picture of this book. You will find it online. It's easily available. There might be some second-hand copies on eBay or Books or Amazon. You'll find it there, inshallah. Okay. Yes, please. Wa alaikum salam.
Mathura.
Yes.
There is one. Their god. Who is a god? Their god was born.
Yeah.
Is called. What's his name?
Krishna?
Krishna. Yeah.
Yes.
And one mosque is behind. It is this mosque is from Aurangzeb time or?
Yes. The mosque was made on top of the temple.
Okay.
The brother asked this question, that there is a place in Mathura, the city of Mathura in India,
Yeah, it
which
is
is
a very important place.
which is known as the birthplace of Krishna. Now, whether Krishna existed or not, whether Krishna was a historic figure or not, is another question, and it is impossible to prove that. He's definitely a legendary figure in Hindu mythology, like Ram is, like Sita is, like Hanuman, and like all these figures they worship nowadays. And these are legends, to say the least. But Mathura is attributed to the birthplace, seen as the birthplace of Krishna. So there was a temple there which was destroyed, desecrated by the Mughal forces, and a masjid was built in its place. As I said earlier, this was to teach the rebels a lesson. There were people who were directly connected to this temple. Order Trust talks about it, that these people were involved in some kind of anti-state activity, and she thinks they were actually involved in the escape of Shivaji. Shivaji was actually in Agra in 1660s in the court of Aurangzeb Alamgir, and he was not so happy with what he was granted as a status within the court, and different sources tell us different things, that he showed his displeasure and he misbehaved within the court, and Aurangzeb confined him because of his misbehavior, because there was a protocol for the court. People in the court couldn't, just behave like they behave on the street. So he was confined, and he escaped from his confinement, and later on he became a thorn for the Mughals, right? So when he escaped, there were people who were involved in planning that escape. Aurangzeb had blamed some of these people who had connections to these temples, and for that reason, as a retribution, as an act of retribution, he desecrated their temples, he destroyed them. So this was a calculated, exceptional act on the part of the king. This was not countrywide, statewide policy. If that was the case, all the temples from Bengal to the Punjab would have been destroyed. Do you agree? Yes? Because the Mughals were governing. And most of the powerful generals, were Muslims. Hindus were minority in the state apparatus, no doubt, but they were there. Very powerful Hindus with very powerful positions. And they occasionally caused problems, like Rajputs and Marathas and Jats. They did give problems to Mughals occasionally. That's why the Mughals would give them status and keep them close to themselves. So that masjid you're talking about, which was built on top of the temple, is actually on top of the temple, and it dates back to Aurangzeb's time. You're right. Yeah, that particular masjid. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Could you do us a brief summary of comparative between the Mughal Empire at the time and the upcoming European empires, the Spanish? It's the end of the Elizabethan era here. It's James I here.
The Mughals. Okay, so the sister asked me to do a comparison between the Mughal Empire at that time and what the Europeans were doing. The Mughals were far more powerful and richer than any of the European power. In fact, I would go as far as to say that Mughal state at the time of Aurangzeb Alamgir.
Sorry, I meant in terms of governance, because the other empires had a longer legacy than his did. So I mean in terms of governance and legacy.
European governments have had a longer legacy because we had colonialism, and because of colonialism, the legacy of the European governments and the history was taught more so than our own legacy and our own history. Okay, so when the British historians in the 19th century studied the Mughals and studied other Muslim dynasties before the Mughals, they studied these dynasties with a colonial lens. They used a colonial lens, and they very often demonized Muslim kings, in particular Tipu Sultan and Aurangzeb Alamgir. Both of these kings were declared to be bigots. So the narrative which Hindutva or the Hindu extremists are following today in India is actually the British colonial narrative of history. It is not what true historians, objective historians, or trained historians have to say on history. It is what 19th century colonial administrators had to say about Muslim history in India. This is something very important you have to understand. So, where did the demonization of Aurangzeb come from? Where did the demonization of Tipu Sultan come from? It came from British administrators. And they glorified their own history. They glorified their own European civilization. They glorified the European Renaissance, even though there were witches being burnt alive. It's funny that you asked me this question. It so happens, coincidentally, I bought this book today. This book was published in Amsterdam. It looks old, right? It looks very old, right? Yes? It's published in 1709, 2 years after Aurangzeb passed away. So it's 300 years old book, this one in my hand right now, yeah? And it is Dutch. The book discusses martyrs and the killings and the burnings of heretics. And the book is full of woodcuts, plates, pictures, images of people being burnt, tortured, decapitated, okay, and images upon images, as you can see. And I'll show you some images of burnings, killings, and all. Yeah, this is an image of people about to be, they're about to be burnt. Okay, so this was happening in Europe as late as the 18th century, right? This was not discussed. This was not discussed by colonial historians, not to an extent it is discussed today. That was a dark period in European history. It is usually called the Enlightenment. 18th century is usually called the Enlightenment period. But what was happening during the Enlightenment? What was happening? Atlantic slave trade had reached its peak. Most Africans who were transported across the Atlantic Ocean into the Americas were transported in the 18th century when the Enlightenment period was at its peak. Then religious persecution within Europe, people being burnt at stake, burnt. They were being burnt, right? All of this was happening when the Mughals were governing India, right? And such burnings were not happening in India except in the cases of sati. Sati was a tradition in Hindus where they would burn the widow with the husband if the husband died. Okay? This was a tradition which was outlawed eventually, finally, conclusively by the British. But the Mughals discouraged it. Mughals did not want to interfere in Hindu faith. At the same time, they discouraged it. They didn't want to take any part of it. Because every time the Mughals tried to interfere, the Hindus would ask the Mughals to stop interfering in our faith. This is something to do with our faith. This is virtuous. We think, this self-sacrifice of women dying with their husbands at the pyre. When someone dies in Hinduism, in most sects, the deceased is burnt, right? So there was this tradition called sati. The wife of the husband, she would die with the husband and she would be burnt at the pyre. So all of these things were highlighted amazingly by the colonial officers, and this new liberalism the Europeans had found at the time, they wanted to impose it in India. So a lot of these British administrators were followers of John Stuart Mill, philosophers like that, and they brought their liberalism with them to India, which had recently been discovered in Europe, of course. But if we do a comparison, I don't know if I answer your question, sister. If we do a comparison, at that time, the colonial powers, of course, glorified their own history, their own legacy, and they suppressed the history and the legacy of the Mughals and the previous Islamic dynasties. And to this day, unfortunately, and this is an appeal to Muslims, to this day, our history is yatim. Because you are sleeping. You have left it to others. They study it for you. They have to write books for you. They have to dig out sources for you. And we are simply busy in our taxis, our restaurants, our jobs, and we go to work and we come back home and we've done it. No. We need to think ahead. We need to create leaders for the future. And they will never come about until you teach them about your past achievements. Until you know, your children know what happened in the past, they will never have something to look up to become something great in the future. Learn from the past mistakes and repeat what was done rightly in the past. So this is very important. So we have to protect our legacy, we have to preserve it, we have to teach it, we have to promote it, we have to highlight it, we have to acknowledge the mistakes, and we have to repeat the virtues of the past.
So, but those empires went on for hundreds of years, and his finished in 50 years.
Whose?
Aurangzeb's.
No, Mughals lasted for over 3 centuries.
Yes, but in terms of
his reign.
Not his reign. I mean, his governance. It disintegrated shortly after he died.
Yeah, because
compared to the Europeans.
No. Europe was going through similar problems. Succession was a problem in Europe as well. There were many civil wars in Europe. There were bloodier wars in Europe. The wars in Europe. I'm sure you know what happened between Napoleon and Wellington. The Battle of Waterloo, and before that the French Revolution, and then 30 years of war, 100 years war, the list goes on. There's so much happening in Europe at that time. Even the First and the Second World War, forget the colonial period, what happened in the 20th century, this was the bloodiest century of human history, and thankfully Muslims have little part to play. Ironically, Muslims are shown as the biggest culprits of murder and terrorism in the 20th and 21st century. But if you look at the reality, Muslims have the least part in mass murder, in genocides, and in terrorism when it comes to the 20th and 21st century. Muslims have the least part to play. Muslims, thankfully, had no direct involvement in the First World War. The Ottomans got pushed into it, yes, we know, right? And the Second World War, completely the doing of European powers. So a lot was happening in Europe as well. So this was a turmoil which unfortunately happened in the Mughal Empire when Aurangzeb was succeeded by unable children and grandchildren who couldn't hold on to power. They were greedy, they were lazy, they were too involved in, pastimes that destroyed their moral and physical abilities. That's why they lost the power. So after that, the Mughals never recovered. But then there came leaders like Hyder Ali, Tipu Sultan. Hyder Ali, the father of Tipu Sultan, single-handedly, as a soldier, Hyder Ali rose within the ranks of a small state, a state that consisted of 33 towns. Hyder Ali joined that state and rose to power, became a general, and then overpowered the state himself, became the ruler of the state, and that became an empire within South India. And then his son inherited that empire, Tipu Sultan. Okay, and a very staunch Muslim again, very orthodox. A lot of people think he was Shia, but he was not Shia. Even his coins, when you look at his coins, he was not. His coins, you know what his coins were called? Tipu Sultan's coins? They were called Ahmadi. The biggest coin, the gold coin, was called Ahmadi. Then the one after that, which was about 6 grams of gold, Siddiqui. And the one after that, which was about 3 grams of gold, called Faruqi. Is this a Shia? Huh? Exactly. Right? So, a lot of people think or assume that he was, because of the name of his father, Hyder Ali, or his name was Sultan Fateh Ali Muhammad Tipu. So people think, but if anything, that's another lecture in itself. Maybe in the future, inshallah, we can do a lecture on Tipu Sultan as well, and discuss history similarly, inshallah ta'ala. I'll try to make it shorter. This time it went on too long because Aurangzeb's reign was very long. It was 50 years. So we had a lot to discuss. But with Tipu Sultan, similarly, he became a very powerful figure. He became so powerful, and this is after the decline of the Mughal sisters. The Mughals are gone. By 1750, Mughals have lost their power. But then rises another Muslim power in the south, in the state called the state of Mysore, where this king, in fact, would you believe this? The American War of Independence, when was it happening? 1770s. 1770s, right? Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan were sending emissaries to America to discuss foreign policy with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, you know who Thomas Jefferson is? You know who that is? The author of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, the one who wrote the Declaration of Independence, one of the early presidents of the United States of America. Tipu Sultan sent an embassy to Thomas Jefferson. It is acknowledged in his own hand in documents. Thomas Jefferson. And one of the battles, and Tipu Sultan even offered support, because Tipu Sultan in India was fighting against British imperialism, British colonialism. So he wanted to affect British interests globally. He found out where British are fighting. Okay, so Tipu Sultan wanted to support the enemies of the British Empire or British colonialism wherever they were. And Americans were fighting for independence, and Tipu Sultan and his father found an opportunity, and they sent embassies, they offered support in terms of weapons, money, whatever. And amazingly, there was an American battle. Listen to this carefully. There was an American battle, the Battle of Delaware. Very famous. Google it, you will see the details. The Battle of Delaware, it was fought in 1784. And there were 4 vessels from the American side, and there were 4 vessels from the British side. One of the vessels from the American side was called Hyder Ali. One of the vessels, the ships, battleship, one of the battleships which the Americans used against the British in this Battle of Delaware, which is happening in America, at the coast. The ship is called Hyder Ali. Why? To taunt the British. The Americans were using Hyder Ali's name to taunt the British. The guy who's giving you trouble in India, he's also here. We help. So Tipu Sultan had these links, you know, and his weapons, the weapons he produced, he became so powerful that he was communicating with Napoleon Bonaparte. He was sending messages to King Louis of France, and after him Napoleon, because Napoleon came to power, and then he was sending messages to the Ottoman Emperor. He was trying to unite the Indian rulers against the British colonialism, and that's why the British wanted him dead as soon as possible. And in 1799, after 4 long Anglo-Mysore wars, they were able to kill the tiger. He is known as the Tiger of Mysore, Tipu Sultan. And he fought in the battle, hand to hand, and he chose to be killed. He could be saved, he could escape. There were many escape routes. His attendants, he encouraged him to escape and live today and fight tomorrow. He said, for how long? And there are historic records available where he is thought to have fought personally and injured few British soldiers. Sultan, king himself, one of the richest men in the world at the time, you know, and then he was shot in his stomach and he was injured, and one of the British soldiers came to rob him of his belt, because kings, you know, when the belt was studded with precious stones, and the soldiers at the time, the best pastime for them in war was to rob and plunder. You know, this is the time to get rich. So one of them came and tried to take off the belt, and Sultan struck him with the sword, as much power as he had in his body, and then the British soldier stepped back and shot him in the temple, and that was the end of his life. Tipu Sultan rahmatullah alayh. So that's a very interesting history as well, which we can discuss inshallah ta'ala at another time in the future. Inshallah, we can talk about that. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
See, the first one, where is the da'wah? With the Mughal, they enter the India, they stay there for a while, and Aurangzeb, he conquered 95% of the. Where is the effect? Where is the Muslim spreading war? Not the war. Where is the da'wah? Or with this war, was it for Futuh Islamiyya? Was it for Nashr, the word of Allah Azza wa Jal, or for his kingship?
Very good question. Where is the da'wah during the Mughal period? And what were the wars for? In particular, Aurangzeb, why was he fighting these wars? Was it for the sake of Allah? Was it the expansion of Islamic domain, or was it just to expand his kingdom? This is a very complex question, and it cannot be answered easily, because we don't know what was in Aurangzeb's head. We don't know what was in his mind. From his correspondence, what we know, he wanted to take the land of India to establish justice, to provide justice to people. And his concept of justice was definitely Islamic. You know, because when you read his writings, his letters to his sons and his grandsons, he is reminding them of hellfire. He's rebuking them, and he's asking them to fear Allah. You will face Allah one day, you will die, so be just, do justice with your subjects. So this is how he's rebuking his people. So whether he was fighting these wars for the sake of Allah, fi sabilillah, or whether he's fighting these wars to get rich,
I don't speak about his niyyah.
Yes.
Hopefully, inshallah, for good, but
right.
As reflection, because lots of places where is the Muslim armies, they come to that area without the du'at.
Yes.
We find them, they go out of it. That happened with Uthmani Empire, that's happened with Mughal Empire.
Yes.
That's different, for example, what's happened with Uqba ibn Nafi'.
Yes.
So that
you see the problem. Yeah, I understand. You see the problem with the way we see da'wah today was not necessarily the same way. Why do we need to do da'wah today? One of the reasons, and this is my theory, and I can be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. One of the reasons Muslims are now waking up to da'wah is because Muslims are very weak. Politically and militarily, economically, Muslims are very weak. And Muslims feel now we have to speak up. We have to give da'wah. We have to tell people about Islam, because people are now worried. People are now, against Islam and Muslims. People have been brainwashed. They have been conditioned. People hate us now because we're not doing da'wah. So this is one of the biggest reasons why this is like a reactionary movement in the 21st century. Okay? The way da'wah happened in the 20th and 21st century, it has never happened before on this scale. Never happened before. There are people in South America giving da'wah. There are people in Africa, people in India giving da'wah everywhere. Da'wah was never like this before. But previously, the Uthmaniyin, they were in power. They didn't care. Okay? Their expansion, let me inshallah quickly, so maybe your question will be answered. Their expansion was not necessarily for da'wah. Their expansion was, of course, at times the sultans claimed that this is fi sabilillah. We're doing it fi sabilillah so that we can have the justice of Islam, and if people want to come to Islam, it's their choice. But Islam, to my knowledge, was never actively preached to the subjects. In India, ulama were doing it, of course. The Sufis were doing it in the shrines. Hindus were coming to Sufi shrines and they were converting to Islam, and their version of Islam was, it was a bit messed up, right? So people were coming to Islam that way, right? But never did the state had a dawah department, to my knowledge. They had a waqf department. They had a department to build madaris, masajid, religious institutions, giving wages to the ulama, but never a da'wah department, unfortunately, right? To my knowledge. So even if you go back to the wars of early Islam, for example, Rabi' bin Amir, who was one of the yes, he was one of the spokesperson for Muslims, and he went to speak to Rustam. In Tabari, in Tariq Tabari, Imam Tabari gives the whole incident as to what happened. So Rabi bin Amir spoke to Rustam, and he gave his reasons why we are in Persia, because Rustam asked, why are you Bedouins, uncivilized people, what are you doing in our land? What do you want? You want camels and goats? Go and take them, we'll give them and go back. He said, no, this time not camel and goats. This time it is to remove you so that your people can hear the word of Islam, so that they can hear the word of Allah, and if they choose to come to Islam, then they are brothers. If they don't, then it's up to them. So this was the purpose of those people, and they struggled. Later on, dynamics changed, everything changed. So with Mughals, to answer your question directly, with Aurangzeb Alamgir, there is no doubt that he was a strong Muslim. He was following the rules and practices of Islam to the best of his ability, personally and nationally. As a king, he was trying to implement as much Islam as he could in his power, right? Because sometimes you cannot do certain things; they're beyond your power. Because if you do those things, you will destroy what you have, right? So he was doing as much as he could, and there were many thousands of people coming to Islam, no doubt, many thousands of people, either by listening to the ulama or by working for Muslims or by mixing with Muslim soldiers, for example. So there was a lot of cross pollination in that regard. There was a lot of interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims during the time of Aurangzeb. A lot of Hindus, believe it or not, had become Persianized. They started to write in Persian. They started to admire Muslim figures. Slowly, there was gradual movement towards Islam. But as we know da'wah today, as a movement, it didn't exist in those times, unfortunately. Yes. So today is a different thing. Today is a different thing. And maybe Muslims are doing it for a reason. There are some driving motives or forces behind Muslims, why Muslims are doing it. One of the reasons is fear. Maybe other reasons, other people do it for reward, because they have been inspired by people like Sheikh Ahmad Didat or other du'at around the world, and thousands of people are coming to Islam. But there are a number of different reasons why Muslims do da'wah today. Okay?
But in India, some tribe called Goria in Assam. Have you heard about?
Yes, I know Assam, but I don't know.
Muslim. Not now, it's maybe 400-500 years ago.
Yeah.
We have in Dibrugarh, in Assam, about 500 years old mosques as well.
Okay. Yeah. There are older mosques in India.
Yeah, one tribe is a very famous tribe in Assam, in India. They are all Muslim, but not
Muslim conversion in India happened in two places mainly, more than other places: Bengal and Punjab, mainly. If you look at native Indian Muslims, not outsiders, because a lot of the Muslims in India, the light-skinned ones, they came with the Mughals, or before the Mughals, or after the Mughals. They are Turkic, they are Persian, they are Afghans, a lot of them, right? But there are native Indians who are Bengali, mainly, or they are Punjabis. Okay, this happened because of mainly Sufi activity. You know, in the 13th century, in the 14th century, a lot of the Sufis had come to India with the Delhi Sultanate. Why the Sufis came into India is because of the Mongol invasions. When the Mongols invaded Central Asia, a lot of Central Asian Sufis and scholars and preachers, and mystics, they had to run for their lives. Samarkand and Bukhara was destroyed. Ibn Rathir, rahmatullah alayh.
And Syria had
Up to Syria. Up to Syria. The Mongols went up to Syria. They started from northern China and they went up to Syria. They killed 10 million Muslims. They destroyed the entire civilization of Islam in the north. Okay? And then they came into Iran, Persia. Iran was not Shia at the time, by the way. Iran was Shafi'i. Iranians were 90% Shafi'i Muslims. Iran changed after the year 1500. Remember the year 1500, 500 years ago, when the Safavis came to power, who were also Turkic. They were Central Asian Safavis, right? They came to power and they forced Iranian population into Shiaism. It took Iran 3 centuries to become Shia. Before 1500, some of the famous Imam Ghazali, Persian, Fakhruddin al-Razi from Tehran, Persian, Hafiz, Shirazi, Sunni, Persian, Shafi'i, Sheikh Sadi, okay, and other Persian scholars. There are so many Persian scholars from Iran and from Iranian territory, or Persia, what we call Persia today, right? They were Persian. They wrote in Persian. So Mongols destroyed all of that, and a lot of these ulama, they ran for their lives. Where did they go? They went to India, Delhi. And that's why Delhi became an empire, because a lot of Muslim thinkers, philosophers, mystics, architects, they came into Delhi in the 13th century. I'm talking about 1230s, 1240s, 1250s, 60s, this time. The time of Sultan Shamsuddin Iltutmish and Sultan Ghiyasuddin Balban. These were Turkic rulers. They were Turks, but they were strong Muslims, and they had established this government in India, in Delhi. And Mongol invasions caused the influx of Muslim scholars and mystics and philosophers into India. And then these Sufis and mystics and philosophers and scholars, they came to India, they spread all over India. Some went to Bengal, some went to Punjab, some established the Dargah. You know what we call Dargah? The Khankah. Khankah is like, there is a sheikh sitting there, and there is the entourage of the sheikh and the halaqah of the sheikh, for example. Yeah. So a lot of Hindus would come in and they would sit, and then because they were Sufis, they had no problem with music. Most of them. So there was music going on there as well. Sama, what we call sama, right? They were singing moral poetry with music. And Hindus, music is in their DNA. To this day, you know what I'm talking about. Indians, music was in their blood. It was in DNA. So one of the reasons why they came to these Sufi shrines was because of the music and all that. So they started listening to these Sufi sheikhs, and they started to convert in hundreds of thousands. Albeit in a distorted version of Islam, but they thought this is Islam. So they became Muslims like that. This is why to this day, majority of the Muslims in India to this day are what? Sufis. They are Barelvis, Sufis, Barelvis. Okay.
Mirza Ghalib was Sufi as well, isn't he?
Yes. Yes, they were also.
He's
Look,
very famous.
up to 19th century, most of the Indian Muslims were, if not fully Sufi, they were heavily influenced by Sufism. It was only the rise of Ahlul Hadith in India that kind of started challenging these practices of Sufis and grave veneration and things like all these traditions. What people do today, Yarvi and things like that, in the name of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani and things like that. This was well established. And when one of the grandsons of Shah Waliullah, Shah Ismail Shaheed, rahmatullah alayhi, when he stood up against these traditions in Delhi, he was attacked by the so-called scholars at the time, because that was the norm of Islam in India. And people were thinking this person has come with something new, but he came with pure Islam. He was trying to tell them to go back to pure Islam, and they started calling him Wahhabi and all of that and this and that. You know, the title, the derogatory. Wahhabi was a derogatory term used in India to label those people who were speaking against bid'ah and shirk and all that. So it's a very long story, you know. There is a book I recommend titled Indian Muslims by an author called Mujib.
Now one music director, A. Rahman.
Yes.
He's a convert.
He's a convert, yes.
He was a Hindu.
Yes.
But
He loves music.
Yeah.
He loves music, and
his music is all over the world.
Yes,
he's very
I've met
famous.
him. I've met him. I met him once, bumped into him in Regent's Park Masjid, Central London. And I thought, is this A. Rahman? And I took him on the side and I said, you know, you do what you do. I know what you do and you know what you do. And, you know, but can you use your talents for Muslims as well? Like produce some stuff for Muslims, you know? And maybe he didn't understand me. But I'm not saying he's doing what he's doing because of me, but later on he started doing some qawwalis and stuff like that as well. So I didn't mean the qawwalis, I meant some, you know, some halal stuff for Muslims, like, you know, some nasheeds and some good stuff for Muslims, some moral stuff for Muslims, which is allowed, you know. But again, it's a good example.
What about Yusuf Islami? He's a kind of Sufi or?
Who?
Yusuf Islam.
Yeah, Yusuf Islam is Sufi.
Sufi.
Yes, Sufi, yes.
Are there any notable accounts of his interaction with the Arab-speaking world or with the Ottomans?
Yes, 100%. That's a very good question. Are there any accounts of Aurangzeb interacting with? Definitely, his interaction with ulama in Hijaz. There is evidence for that. In fact, he invited ulama to India to come and help in the compilation of fataw-i-alamgiri. So fataw-i-alamgiri, amazingly, is in Arabic. And in India, fataw-al-hindiya is also known as al-fataw-al-hindiya and also fataw-i-alamgiri. It is in Arabic, and it had to be translated for the local people in Persian. So there were Hijazi ulama from Hijaz, Hanafis, of course. They came to India and they helped compiling fataw-i-alamgiri. And he had interaction with the Sharif of Makkah. At the time, when he came to power, the Sharif of Makkah refused to acknowledge him as the king, as the rightful king, because he had imprisoned his father. So the Sharif of Makkah at the time, he said to Aurangzeb that I will not acknowledge you, because you know sometimes these kings would like to be acknowledged by religious authorities in different Muslim positions. For example, a lot of the Indian rulers afterwards would like to be acknowledged by the Ottomans as the rightful king. Okay, so Sharif of Makkah said, I will not acknowledge you because you have imprisoned your father. But Sharif of Makkah had no idea what was happening in India. Why Aurangzeb had taken that drastic measure. Why he had imprisoned his father. What was his father doing? What was his father trying to do in India? You know, by appointing Dara Shukur. Okay, so Aurangzeb could not write lengthy letters and books to the Sharif. So there is that definitely evidence for that interaction, no doubt. And I'm sure there is more. There is a lot more. Indian kings, and I'm sure even Aurangzeb sent a lot of money to Hijaz to support the Haramain, you know, to feed the Hajjaj and to build some of the best accommodations in pre-oil Saudi Arabia. Do you understand what I mean by that? Pre-oil Saudi Arabia. 1950s backwards. The best accommodations were built by Indian princes, ladies, monarchs and rich men. And they are to this day, some of the areas, some of the buildings are known by their names.
Even the Madaris.
Yes, even Madaris. Some of the best ones were supported, funded by Indian rulers. Later on, because India split into many states, so some of them were Muslim rulers and they were funding. But even during the Mughal period, Mughals were sending a lot of money to Hijaz, to the Sharif, and to support the students and the ulama there. So there is definitely very strong evidence of Aurangzeb communicating with Hijazi scholars and leadership at that time, no doubt. Anyone else, brothers and sisters? Yes. Khalas. Time for salah. Thank you so much for listening. May Allah reward you for being patient for so long. It is not easy to discuss history, but we have done some of it today, and inshallah in the future we will do more if the masjid allows, inshallah. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك